What happens when a moment of casual prejudice collides with unimaginable power? We've all had those moments, being overlooked, underestimated, or outright disrespected. But what if you had the power to not just complain, but to bring the entire system that wronged you to its knees in a matter of minutes? This is the story of Dr. Serafina Monroe, a brilliant, self-made black woman and CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire. When she was denied the first-class seat she paid for, she didn't just get angry. She made a decision so ruthless, so audacious, it would make her a global icon and a corporate villain all at once. But this isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens next, when the world you shatter decides to shatter you right back. The air in the exclusive Centurion Lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of entitlement and expensive coffee. It was a symphony of quiet clicks from MacBooks, the soft rustle of the Wall Street Journal, and the clinking of ice in glasses of premium whiskey, even at 3 in the afternoon. Amidst this backdrop of calculated leisure, Dr. Serafina Monroe was an island of unassuming calm. Anyone who glanced at her would have seen nothing remarkable. A woman in her late 30s, her hair pulled back in a simple but elegant puff, wearing a tailored charcoal gray tracksuit from a niche athleisure brand that screamed comfort, not wealth. No logos, no ostentatious jewelry. The only hint of her status was the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, its face a subtle, dark blue. But even that was partially obscured by her sleeve. She was reading a well-worn paperback, a collection of Stoic philosophy, its pages softened by use. To the world of high finance and technology, Dr. Serafina Monroe was a titan, the founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, a company at the forefront of neural interface technology. She had clawed her way from a scholarship kid at MIT to a billionaire whose innovations were shaping the future. Her company's stock was a darling of the NASDAQ, and her name was whispered with the same reverence as Musk or Bezos. But inside Ethereum's gleaming Seattle headquarters, she was known for something else, an almost pathological intolerance for incompetence and a ferocious loyalty to those who earned her respect. She was a leader forged in the fires of adversity, and she had the scars and the standards to prove it. Today, however, she was just a tired traveler. She had just closed a grueling but successful negotiation in New York, securing a partnership with a major pharmaceutical company to integrate Ethereum's tech into next-generation prosthetics. All she wanted was to get back to Seattle, sleep in her own bed, and spend a day with her dog. The 12-hour flight to a conference in Tokyo could wait. Her phone buzzed. It was her COO, Damian Reyes. "All signed," his text read. "The board is ecstatic. You're a miracle worker, Sarah." She smiled faintly and texted back, "Miracles are just unobserved variables. See you tomorrow. Buy the team around at the Nest." She closed her book, drained the last of her sparkling water, and headed toward the gate for her flight. Trans-American Airlines Flight 781 to Seattle. Her first-class ticket, Seat 1A, was a small but necessary luxury. It was her quiet space, her airborne office, her decompression chamber from the pressures of her world. The trouble began at the gate. The agent, a harried-looking man named Gary with a name tag askew, scanned her digital boarding pass. A red light beeped. He scanned it again. Beep? "Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your ticket," he said, not quite making eye contact. "I'm sure it's just a system glitch," Serafina said calmly. "It was confirmed this morning." "It's showing this seat has been reassigned due to an aircraft change," Gary mumbled, tapping furiously at his keyboard. "We had to downgrade from a 737 to a 767. Different layout." A woman in a crisp dark blue flight attendant's uniform stepped forward. Her name tag read, Brenda Davies, lead purser. She had perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and an air of weary authority. "What's the problem, Gary?" she asked, her voice carrying a clipped, impatient tone. She glanced at Serafina's tracksuit, and a micro-expression, a flicker of dismissive judgment, crossed her face. "This passenger's seat, 1A, is showing as occupied. System must have double booked during the equipment swap," Gary explained. Brenda turned her professional but cold gaze on Serafina. "Do you have your confirmation email, honey?" The honey landed like a small, sharp stone. Serafina felt a familiar tightening in her chest. It was the same tone she'd heard her whole life from people who had already decided who and what she was based on a single glance. "I do," Serafina said, her voice remaining even. She pulled up the email on her phone. "Booked 2 weeks ago, paid in full, seat 1A. Brenda glanced at the phone screen, unimpressed. "Yes, well, as Gary said, the aircraft changed. The system automatically reseats passengers based on status and check-in time. I'm sure we can find you something comfortable in premium economy." "I paid for a first-class ticket," Serafina stated, the calm in her voice now crystalline and hard. "I expect a first-class seat. I'm not interested in a downgrade." "There are no other first-class seats available," Brenda said with an air of finality, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "The cabin is full. You can either take the premium economy seat or we can book you on the next flight tomorrow." This was not about the seat anymore. It was about the casual, unthinking dismissal. Brenda hadn't looked at her name, her status, or the booking details. She had looked at a black woman in a tracksuit and made an assumption that she was someone who probably got the ticket on points or through a lottery and wouldn't know how to handle the situation. "I'd like to see the passenger manifest for the first-class cabin," Serafina said. Brenda actually scoffed, a tiny, sharp sound. "I can't show you that. It's a privacy violation. Now we're about to close the door. What's it going to be?" "I'd like to speak to the captain," Serafina insisted. Brenda's plastic smile tightened. She spoke into her shoulder radio. "Captain Henderson, a moment at the jet bridge, please. We have a passenger refusing to accept a seat change." A moment later, a man with silvering hair and a distinguished uniform appeared. Captain Robert Henderson. He looked from his lead purser to Serafina, his expression one of annoyance at being disturbed. "What's the situation, Brenda?" "This lady," Brenda said, loading the word with condescension, "is refusing to accept that her seat was reassigned after the equipment swap. I've offered her the best available seat in premium economy, but she's insisting on seeing the manifest and speaking with you." The captain gave Serafina a cursory glance. He saw what Brenda saw. "Ma'am, I trust my crew. If Purser Davies says the cabin is full, it's full. These system glitches are unfortunate, but they happen. Please take the offered seat. We need to depart on time. We have a schedule to keep." He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask to see her ticket. He simply took his subordinate's word and, in doing so, co-signed her prejudice. Serafina took a slow, deep breath. The stoic philosophy she'd been reading moments before echoed in her mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But another, more primal part of her whispered back, and what is power for, if not to reshape outside events to your will? Fine, Serafina said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I'll take the seat in the back. Brenda's smile returned, this time with a glint of triumph. Excellent. Gary, find her the best one we have. Glad we could sort that out. As Serafina walked past them down the jet bridge, she heard Brenda mutter to the captain, Some people just love to make a scene. Serafina found her new seat, 24B, a middle seat, in coach, trapped between a large man who was already snoring and a young woman who was FaceTiming loudly. The flight attendant in this section, a kind-faced young man, offered her a sympathetic look. She sat down. She buckled her seatbelt. She did not take out her book. She did not put in her noise-canceling headphones. She stared at the seat back in front of her. The quiet fury inside her was no longer a spark. It was a cold, controlled fusion reaction. They hadn't just denied her a seat. They had tried to deny her dignity. They had assessed her worth and found it wanting. She thought of the thousands of tiny cuts she'd endured her entire life. The guidance counselor who suggested she aim for community college instead of MIT. The venture capitalist who spoke to her male co-founder instead of her. The journalist who described her as aggressive while calling her male counterparts assertive. This was not just another cut. This was the one that would demand a reckoning. They thought she loved to make a scene. They had no idea what kind of scene she was capable of making. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, she pulled out her phone and connected to the plane's sluggish Wi-Fi. She opened a secure messaging app. Her fingers flew across the screen, a single message to Damian Reyes, her COO. Damian, cancel my Tokyo trip. I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out who owns Trans-American Airlines' parent holding company. Find the majority shareholder. I want you to initiate a hostile takeover. Use the Phoenix Fund. Authorize up to $10 billion. I want control. And Damian, I want it by the time we land. The 5.5-hour flight from New York to Seattle was, for the other passengers, a routine journey. For Serafina Monroe, it was the quiet eye of a hurricane she had just created. She declined the drink service, ignored the in-flight movie, and remained perfectly still, her mind a whirlwind of cold, calculated fury. In Seattle, Damian Reyes read the message and nearly dropped his phone. He had worked with Serafina for a decade, from the garage startup days to the gleaming corporate tower. He knew her intensity. He'd seen her eviscerate rivals in boardrooms and charm skeptical investors with sheer force of will. But this was different. This was biblical. Phoenix Fund? $10 billion? He muttered to the empty office. The Phoenix Fund was Ethereum's private, off-the-books strategic investment pool, capital reserved for audacious, game-changing acquisitions or to defend against corporate raiders. Using it to buy an airline because of a bad service experience was like using a nuclear weapon to kill a fly. He tried to call her. The call wouldn't go through on the weak in-flight Wi-Fi. He sent a message back. Sarah, what happened? Talk to me before we do something this drastic. Her reply came back a minute later, chilling in its simplicity. Incompetence is a disease. Bigotry is a cancer. We are going to perform surgery. Get it done, Damian. Full brief on landing. Damian sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and got to work. He knew there was no arguing with her when she used that tone. He was her COO, her loyal second-in-command, and his job was to execute. He assembled Ethereum's M&A, mergers and acquisitions, Tiger Team, a group of ruthless lawyers and financial analysts who could dissect a company's balance sheet before its CEO finished his morning coffee. Their research, conducted with frantic, caffeine-fueled efficiency, revealed a critical vulnerability. Trans-American Airlines was not a behemoth like Delta or United. It was a subsidiary of a mid-tier, publicly traded holding company, Global Wings Aviation, GWA, which had been struggling for years. They were asset-rich with their flight routes but cash-poor, heavily in debt, and their stock had been languishing. Their largest shareholder was a collection of fractured, passive investment funds, with no single entity holding a controlling stake. They were ripe for the picking. Damon and his team started buying, not on the open market, which would drive the price up, but through a series of quiet, back-channel, block trade negotiations with the institutional funds. They offered a generous premium, payable immediately in cash from the Phoenix Fund. To these fund managers, it was a golden parachute, an unexpected exit from a long underperforming asset. They didn't know who the buyer was. The acquisition was being made through a newly created, anonymous shell corporation based in Delaware. As Flight 781 cruised over the Rocky Mountains, billions of dollars were changing hands. The digital architecture of Wall Street was being rewritten to serve Serafina Monroe's wrath. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Brenda Davies was enjoying a quiet moment. She'd managed the cabin service with her usual efficiency. The passenger in 1A, a minor tech influencer named Chad Preston, who had been upgraded at the last minute, was suitably impressed. He'd even promised her a shout-out on his Instagram. Brenda felt a sense of satisfaction. She had maintained order, asserted her authority, and kept the premium experience intact for the right kind of passenger. The woman in the tracksuit was a forgotten annoyance. Captain Henderson, locked in the cockpit, was thinking about his upcoming golf game in Palm Springs. The flight was smooth, the weather was clear. It was just another day at the office, 35,000 feet above the world's problems. The plane began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. As the wheels touched down with a gentle screech, a series of emails were landing in the inboxes of the GWA board members and the senior management of Trans-American Airlines. They announced a change in controlling ownership, effective immediately. They called for an emergency virtual board meeting in 1 hour. The passengers of Flight 781 deplaned. Serafina, carrying her single backpack, walked unnoticed through the terminal, her expression unreadable. She stepped into a waiting black Escalade. where Damien was waiting for her, a tablet in his hand. "It's done," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "We have a 58% controlling stake in Global Wings Aviation. They're in shock. The board meeting is scheduled. What are your orders, General?" "My orders are simple," Serafina said, her voice like ice. "First, I want the full name and employee ID of every crew member on that flight. Gate agent, purser, co-pilot, captain, everyone. Second, I want you to draft a new corporate policy for all GWA subsidiaries. A zero-tolerance policy on discriminatory behavior, effective immediately. Third, schedule a press conference for tomorrow." "Sarah, the optics of this," Damien began. "The optics are that a black woman was treated like a second-class citizen, and the company that employed the people who did it is now owned by her," she cut him off. "The optics are perfect." Back at the airport, the crew of Flight 781 were going through their post-flight checks. Brenda was writing her report, noting the minor passenger seating dispute, which was resolved professionally. Captain Henderson was signing off on the flight log. A local station manager, a man they knew well, approached them, his face pale. He was flanked by two people in corporate suits they didn't recognize. "Brenda, Captain Henderson, can I have a word with you and your crew in the briefing room?" the manager said, his voice strained. The entire flight and cabin crew gathered, puzzled. They thought it might be about a surprise inspection. One of the suits, a woman from Human Resources, stepped forward. She held a stack of envelopes. "On behalf of the new ownership of Global Wings Aviation," she began, her voice devoid of emotion, "I'm here to inform you that your employment with Trans-American Airlines is terminated, effective immediately." A stunned silence filled the room. Brenda let out a disbelieving laugh. "You're joking, right? Fired? For what?" "Violation of corporate policy," the HR woman said, reading from a script. "Failure to adhere to standards of customer service and professional conduct. Gross insubordination resulting in brand damage." "Brand damage?" Captain Henderson boomed, his face turning purple. "We had a perfect flight. This is insane. I've been with this airline for 30 years. You can't just—" "The decision is final and non-negotiable," the HR woman continued, unmoved. "You will be escorted from the premises. Your final paychecks and severance details are in these envelopes." Brenda's face crumpled. "Who? Who is the new owner? Who did this?" The HR woman looked down at her paper, then back up at Brenda. "The controlling interest was acquired by a private investment entity. However, the directive for your termination came personally from a passenger on your flight today, Dr. Serafina Monroe." The name meant nothing to Brenda, but a younger flight attendant in the back gasped and pulled out his phone. He did a quick search. His eyes went wide. "Oh my God," he whispered. "She's the CEO of Etherian Dynamics. She's a billionaire. The woman in the gray tracksuit." The color drained from Brenda Davies' face. The full, terrifying scope of her miscalculation crashed down on her. The honey, the dismissive wave, the condescending smile. She hadn't been putting an upstart in her place. She had been poking a dragon. Captain Henderson stood there speechless. His 30-year career, his pension, his reputation, all gone. Not because of a crash, not because of a mistake in the cockpit, but because he hadn't bothered to get out of his seat and treat a passenger with basic respect. The story exploded. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Bloomberg, the New York Times, a dozen viral threads on X, formerly Twitter. The initial headlines were sensational. "Billionaire CEO fires entire flight crew after seat dispute." The narrative was chaotic. Some painted Serafina as a hero, striking a blow against corporate indifference and racism. Others called her a petty, power-mad tyrant, a corporate Karen with a bottomless bank account. The world was watching, and Dr. Serafina Monroe was about to give her side of the story. The press conference was held in the atrium of the Etherian Dynamics headquarters. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to inspire awe. The press corps was there in force, a frantic sea of cameras, microphones, and skeptical journalists. The air crackled with anticipation. Serafina Monroe walked to the podium alone. She was not wearing a power suit. Instead, she wore a simple, elegant black dress. No jewelry save for the same understated watch. She looked directly into the cameras, her gaze unflinching. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and measured, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. You've read the headlines. You've formed your opinions. Let me be clear about what happened yesterday. It was not about a seat. It was not about a petty grievance or a fit of pique." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "It was about a culture of indifference that so often serves as a cloak for prejudice. It was about employees of a company who, when faced with a choice, chose condescension over service and dismissal over dignity. Captain Henderson and his crew were not fired because they made a mistake. They were fired because their behavior was a symptom of a sickness that has plagued Global Wings aviation for years, a sickness I have now acquired the power to cure." A reporter from a major news network shouted the first question. "Dr. Monroe, critics are calling this a gross abuse of power. You used billions of dollars to settle a personal score. How do you respond to that?" Serafina met his gaze. "My entire life has been about the responsible application of power, the power of code to solve problems, the power of capital to build new technologies, and yes, the power of a CEO to set the standard for her organization. The previous management of GWA allowed a culture to fester where an employee like Brenda Davies felt empowered to judge a customer based on her appearance, and a leader like Captain Henderson felt it was acceptable to rubber stamp that prejudice without a moment's investigation. I did not see it as settling a score. I saw it as a hostile takeover of a toxic work environment. I have a fiduciary duty to my shareholders to protect my investments, and my newest investment, Trans-American Airlines, was being actively damaged by its own employees. So I removed them. That's not abuse of power. That's just good business." Another journalist stood. "But the crew had decades of experience between them. You've ruined their careers over a single incident." "And how many single incidents had they been responsible for before mine?" Serafina shot back. "How many other passengers who didn't have my resources were dismissed, belittled, or ignored? This behavior doesn't manifest in a vacuum. It is learned, enabled, and tolerated by management. The fish rots from the head down. My action was not just about one crew. It was a message to every single employee of every company I now control. We will be a meritocracy based on excellence and respect. Nothing else will be tolerated. The era of complacency at Trans-American Airlines is over." Then came the masterstroke. "I know some of you may still find my actions extreme," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You may believe the punishment did not fit the crime, so I'd like you to hear it for yourselves." She gestured to Damien, who stood at the side. He nodded to the tech crew. A sound file was played over the massive speaker system. It was a crystal-clear audio recording from her phone. The entire press corps listened in stunned silence to the confrontation at the gate. They heard Brenda's sharp, condescending, "Do you have your confirmation email, honey?" They heard Serafina's calm, firm requests. They heard Brenda's scoff. They heard Captain Henderson's bored, dismissive tone as he sided with his crew without a second thought. And they heard Brenda's final, damning whisper to the captain, "Some people just love to make a scene." The audio ended. The atrium was utterly silent. The context had changed completely. It was no longer an abstract story about a billionaire's tantrum. It was a raw, audible record of casual, systemic disrespect. Every person of color in that room, and millions watching at home, recognized the tone. They had heard honey in 1,000 different ways their entire lives. Serafina let the silence linger before delivering her final statement. "I did not buy an airline to punish a flight attendant," she said, her voice resonating with newfound authority. "I bought an airline to build a better one. We are rebranding. Trans-American will become Aura Air. It will be the gold standard not just for luxury and efficiency, but for inclusivity and respect. Our training will be the most rigorous in the industry, rooted in empathy and cultural awareness. Our technology, powered by Ethereum, will streamline the passenger experience to eliminate the very system failures that created this incident. We will be the safest, most welcoming airline in the skies. This is not a vendetta. This is a promise." She turned and walked off the stage without taking another question. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. The narrative flipped on its head. The Stand with Sarah began trending worldwide. Op-eds praised her for using her superpower for good. She was lauded as a New Age civil rights icon, a capitalist crusader against bigotry. Forbes magazine scrambled to put her on the cover with the headline, "The CEO Who Bought an Airline to Make a Point." Brenda Davies and Captain Henderson became villains in the public imagination. Their pictures were everywhere. They were doxxed, harassed, and turned into memes. Brenda lost friends and became a recluse in her suburban home. Captain Henderson's professional licenses were put under review by the FAA, not for the firing, but for his clear dereliction of duty in handling a passenger complaint, a black mark that effectively ended his flying career. Serafina Monroe was at the apex of her power. She had faced down a PR nightmare and transformed it into a triumph. She was not just a tech mogul anymore. She was a cultural phenomenon. Her approval rating, both in the public sphere and within her own company, had never been higher. She felt invincible, validated, and utterly in control. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. For in the world of high-stakes business, when you're standing on the top of the mountain, you're exposed to the wind from every direction. And a storm was gathering, one that had nothing to do with airlines and everything to do with the empire she had momentarily forgotten to protect. The 6 months following the press conference were a whirlwind of activity. Serafina poured her formidable energy and a substantial amount of Ethereum's capital into the transformation of Aura Air. It was no longer just a business decision. It had become her personal crusade. She commissioned the world's top design firms to create new livery for the planes, elegant cabins with seats designed by ergonomic specialists, and chic uniforms from a high-fashion designer. She personally oversaw the development of a new booking app, powered by Ethereum's AI, that promised a seamless, personalized travel experience. Training for new and existing employees was completely overhauled, co-designed by leading DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, consultants and former hospitality managers from the Four Seasons Hotel Group. Aura Air was going to be perfect. Damian Reyes watched with growing anxiety. "Sarah, the burn rate on Aura is staggering," he told her during one of their weekly check-ins, pointing to a spreadsheet glowing on a monitor. "We're $100 million over budget, and we haven't even flown our first passenger under the new brand." "Excellence has a price, Damian," she replied, not looking up from a fabric swatch for the new first-class blankets. "We're not just launching an airline, we're launching a statement. When people see the Aura Air logo, they need to know it stands for the absolute best. They know Ethereum stands for the best," he countered gently, "and Ethereum's R&D budget is what's paying for this. Our Neural Link project, the one that's supposed to be our next flagship product, we've had to push back its development timeline by a quarter to reallocate engineers to the Aura app. The app is a showcase for our AI," she insisted. "It's good marketing." "It's a distraction," Damian said, his voice firming. "You're a tech CEO, the best in the world. You're not an airline executive. Logistics, union negotiations, fuel hedging, FAA compliance hurdles. This is a different beast, Sarah. It's a low-margin, high-liability quagmire." Serafina finally looked at him, her eyes cool. "Are you questioning my vision, Damian?" "I'm questioning the cost," he said, holding her gaze, "both financial and in terms of your focus. Our competitors aren't sleeping." He was right. While Serafina was busy becoming the queen of the skies, a rival was sharpening his knives on the ground. Alistair Finch, the shrewd and patient CEO of Nexus Innovations, Ethereum's primary competitor, saw Serafina's airline gambit not as a power move, but as a fatal distraction. Alistair was everything Serafina wasn't. He was quiet where she was charismatic, a plotter where she was a sprinter. He avoided the limelight and focused on one thing only: beating Ethereum dynamics. While Serafina was on the cover of Forbes, Alistair was in his lab, poaching Ethereum's top engineers, who were growing frustrated with the company's new focus. He offered them one thing Serafina was no longer providing: a singular, obsessive focus on building the next great leap in technology. He poured all of Nexus's resources into fast-tracking their own neural interface, a project codenamed Synapse. He knew Serafina's team was brilliant, but he also knew they were now rudderless. Their visionary leader busy choosing between shades of blue for cabin lighting. The first cracks in Serafina's new empire began to show, not in the boardroom, but in the hangars. The powerful pilots' union, unimpressed by her celebrity, pushed back hard on new contract terms. Maintenance crews, inherited from the old Transamerican, struggled to meet the accelerated timelines for refurbishing the aging fleet of 767s. FAA certifications for the new software-heavy cockpit upgrades were bogged down in bureaucracy. Serafina, used to the lightning speed of the tech world, grew frustrated. She saw every delay as incompetence, every union demand as insubordination. She started micromanaging, overriding experienced aviation professionals with her own ideas. Why can't we just use this composite material for the fuselage repairs? It's lighter and stronger, she'd demand in a meeting, holding up a sample from an Ethereum lab. Because it's not FAA certified for commercial airliners, Dr. Monroe, a weary head of engineering would explain. That process takes 5 to 7 years. That's an unacceptable timeline, she would snap. Find a way to accelerate it. Her zero-tolerance policy, once hailed as a tool for justice, started to create a climate of fear. Employees were terrified of making mistakes. Innovation stalled. No one wanted to be the next Brenda Davies. The inaugural Aura Air flight from JFK to LAX was a media spectacle. Serafina was on board, holding court in seat 1A. The flight was flawless, the service impeccable. The press was ecstatic. It looked like another triumph. But behind the scenes, Damien knew they had spent $20 million on a single flight, chartering backup planes and crews just in case anything went wrong. The airline was a beautiful gleaming machine, but it was a financial black hole. And as Serafina toasted her success with champagne at 35,000 feet, Alistair Finch was in a sterile clean room in Palo Alto, watching a quadriplegic test subject move a robotic arm with his thoughts, powered by the Nexus Synapse prototype. Phase 1 is complete, Alistair said quietly to his team. Begin preparations for the product launch. Send a preliminary data package to the FDA and leak the video to the MIT Technology Review. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break, and Serafina Monroe was flying straight into it, completely blind. Karma in the corporate world is not a mystical force. It is a balance sheet. It is a stock price. It is the cold, hard mathematics of consequence. For Serafina Monroe, karma arrived in the form of a press release from Nexus Innovations. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Nexus Innovations announces breakthrough. Synapse brain-computer interface begins FDA approval process. The article was accompanied by a stunning video. The test subject, a man who hadn't moved his limbs in a decade, flawlessly manipulating a robotic limb to drink a glass of water. It was the holy grail of neural technology, the very project Ethereum had been working on, the one Damien had warned her about. The market reaction was brutal and instantaneous. Ethereum Dynamics' stock, which had been trading at an all-time high, hemorrhage value. It dropped 15% in the first hour of trading, then 25%. By noon, nearly a third of the company's market capitalization, billions of dollars, had evaporated. Panicked investors saw a company whose visionary leader had been asleep at the wheel, distracted by a vanity project, while its core business was rendered obsolete. Serafina was in an emergency meeting about Aura Air's abysmal quarterly earnings when Damien burst in, his face ashen. He simply held up his tablet, displaying the plummeting stock ticker. The blood drained from Serafina's face. She stumbled out of the meeting, the problems of the airline suddenly seeming laughably small. She locked herself in her office, the magnificent glass-walled sanctuary that now felt like a cage, and watched the devastation unfold on her monitors. Her phone began to ring incessantly. Board members, investors, bankers, the very people who had celebrated her a few months ago were now calling for her head. The narrative had shifted once again. The headlines were no longer celebratory. Ethereum in freefall. Did CEO's airline obsession doom the tech giant? Bloomberg, from hero to zero, the hubris of Serafina Monroe, the Wall Street Journal. The story of the flight crew firing was recontextualized. It was no longer a righteous crusade, but the first symptom of a CEO's runaway ego, a leader who had begun to believe her own hype and had taken her eye off the ball. Then came the second blow. An Aura Air flight from Seattle to Dallas experienced severe turbulence over Colorado. During the event, an overhead bin, improperly latched by a nervous new flight attendant, flew open, and a heavy carry-on bag injured a passenger. It was a minor incident, the kind that happens every day. But in the current climate, it was a catastrophe. The passenger, it turned out, was a vlogger who live-streamed the aftermath. The video of the bleeding passenger and the panicked, inexperienced crew went viral. The NTSB announced an investigation. Aura Air, the symbol of perfection and safety, was now branded as dangerous. The media, smelling blood in the water, descended. The airline became a national punchline, a case study in corporate hubris. Bookings evaporated overnight. Serafina called an emergency meeting of the Ethereum board. These were the same men and women she had cowed into submission with her powerful speech after the firing. Now they looked at her with cold, unforgiving eyes. Their personal fortunes were tied to the company's stock, and she had decimated them. "We are facing a catastrophic loss of investor confidence," said the lead director, a formidable woman named Catherine Lang. "Nexus has eaten our lunch, and you were off designing flight attendant uniforms. We need a drastic change in leadership and strategy to have any hope of survival." "I can fix this," Serafina pleaded, her voice cracking for the first time. "I will divest from the airline immediately. We'll refocus all resources on a next-gen neural link. We can catch up." "It's too late for that, Sarah," a voice said from the end of the table. It was Damian Reyes, her loyal COO. He stood up, his face etched with regret, but also a grim resolve. "I have spent the last 48 hours in talks with a consortium of our largest institutional investors," he announced to the stunned room. "They have agreed to inject the emergency capital we need to stabilize the stock and fast-track our R&D. But their support is conditional." "Conditional on what?" Serafina whispered, though she already knew the answer. "On your resignation as CEO," Damian said, finally looking her in the eye. "And on my appointment as interim chief executive. The board has already held a preliminary vote. I'm sorry, Sarah, I truly am. But you left us no choice. You put your pride ahead of the company." The betrayal was absolute. The power she had wielded so decisively had been turned against her by her most trusted lieutenant. The same mechanism she used to oust the GWA board, a hostile move backed by majority stakeholders, was now being used to oust her. The karma was not just poetic, it was structurally identical. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. The fight had gone out of her. In that moment, she saw the entire chain of events with sickening clarity. The pride that wouldn't let her accept a coach seat. The rage that drove her to buy an airline. The hubris that made her believe she could run it without experience. The blindness that let her ignore the real threat to her empire. She had won her battle with Brenda Davies, but in doing so, she had lost the war for her own legacy. The board voted. It was unanimous. Dr. Serafina Monroe, the titan of tech, the icon, the crusader, was out. She was asked to clear out her office by the end of the day. As she packed her personal belongings into a simple cardboard box, the worn paperback of Stoic philosophy, a picture of her dog, a framed photo of her original garage startup team with a young, smiling Damian by her side, she was no longer a CEO. She was just a woman who had flown too close to the sun and had been burned, not by its heat, but by the shadow she herself had cast. A year can be an eternity. For Serafina Monroe, it had been a descent into a quiet, unfamiliar world. The thunderous applause of press conferences had been replaced by the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. The frantic energy of the NASDAQ ticker had faded into the slow, rhythmic patter of organ rain against a coffee shop window. She had chosen Portland as her self-imposed exile, a city of bridges and breweries, a place where ambition seemed to be measured in the quality of one's craft, not the size of one's empire. She sat now in a worn armchair at the Daily Grind, a neighborhood spot smelling of dark roast and damp wool. The woman who once commanded boardrooms in bespoke couture now wore faded jeans, a simple cashmere sweater, and hiking boots that had seen actual mud. The Patek Philippe, a symbol of time measured in millions, was gone, replaced by the nakedness of her wrist. She had lost weight. The sharp, predatory focus in her eyes had softened into a permanent state of watchfulness. She was no longer a predator, but she still felt like prey. Her new life was a study in anonymity. She'd bought a modest home under a private trust, took long walks in Forest Park with her dog, and read books. Not business strategy, but novels and poetry, trying to reconnect with the parts of herself she had paved over in her relentless climb. Yet the ghost of her former self was a constant companion. She'd catch her reflection and see the phantom image of the CEO. She'd hear a sharp, commanding voice in a store, and her own shoulders would tense in memory. She was Dr. Serafina Monroe, the disgraced titan, a headline frozen in time. This morning, as she scrolled through a news aggregator on her tablet, a habit she couldn't quite break, a headline snagged her attention, pulling the air from her lungs. It was from a popular online magazine under the Where Are They Now section. Humbled and hopeful, 1 year after viral firing, former flight attendant Brenda Davies speaks out. Serafina's finger hovered over the link. A torrent of emotions swirled within her, a flash of the old cold anger, a jolt of defensive pride, and a deeper, more unsettling curiosity. She felt a magnetic pull, a need to see the final chapter of the story she had so violently authored. With a deep breath, she tapped the screen. The article was surprisingly compassionate. The accompanying photo showed Brenda Davies not in her crisp uniform, but in a simple red apron, standing in the home goods section of a Macy's. The hard professional mask was gone. She looked tired, older, but her smile seemed more genuine than any Serafina remembered. She began to read. Brenda spoke with a raw, painful honesty. She described the immediate aftermath, the global shaming, the vitriolic online attacks, losing her home due to legal fees, and an inability to find work in the industry she dedicated her life to. She admitted her initial reaction was one of pure, self-righteous fury. "For months I saw myself as the victim," Brenda was quoted. "I thought, my life is ruined over one misunderstanding. I blame Dr. Monroe entirely. But when you lose everything, you have a lot of time to think. When I started my new job here, I had to learn to serve people again, but from a place of zero authority. Just a person helping another person find the right set of towels." The article continued, "You know, you deal with thousands of people a week in retail, all kinds, and you can't hide in a uniform or behind a title. I learned to see people, really see them, not just the clothes they wear or the tone of their voice. That day on the plane, I didn't see a person. I saw a problem to be managed. I saw a woman in a tracksuit who I decided didn't belong in my first-class cabin. I never once stopped to think about who she was, what her day was like, or that her ticket gave her every right to be there. I made a judgment in a fraction of a second." The final paragraphs were what truly struck Serafina. "The firing felt like the end of the world," Brenda concluded. "It was brutal and disproportionate, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I have to be honest, it forced me to look at a part of myself that was ugly, a prejudice I didn't even know I had. It taught me a lesson about humility that I desperately needed to learn. I don't know if she'll ever read this, but I hope she's okay. I hope she found some peace." Serafina placed the tablet face down on the table. The coffee in her cup was cold. The quiet hum of the cafe seemed to fade into a roar in her ears. "I hope she's okay." The words were a simple human courtesy, yet they felt like an absolution she hadn't earned. She had expected bitterness, a desire for revenge that mirrored her own. Instead, she found reflection and a painful, hard-won grace. In that moment, her entire narrative of the event fractured. She had always framed it as a righteous crusade. She was the warrior queen, punishing the wicked, defending her dignity. But Brenda's words stripped away the mythology. What was left was the stark reality: two women locked in a battle of pride, and one had a nuclear weapon. She had used $10 billion to win an argument, to silence a woman who had called her honey. Her mind replayed the cascade of her own hubris, the cold fury on the plane, the call to Damien, not a strategic decision, but a pure act of vengeful rage. The triumphant press conference where she had basked in the glow of public adoration, feeling like a god. And the blindness that followed, the fatal distraction of Aura Air, believing her Midas touch could turn a leaden industry into gold, while her own kingdom of Etherian rusted from neglect. Damien's betrayal in the boardroom wasn't a betrayal at all, she now realized. It was a desperate act of preservation. He had saved the company from her. The karma hadn't just been losing her company. The true karma was being forced to sit here, in this quiet cafe, and see herself through the eyes of the woman she had destroyed. Brenda Davies had found humility in ruin. Serafina realized she was only just beginning to learn what that word meant. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Monroe?" The voice was hesitant, young. Serafina looked up, her guard instantly raised. A young woman stood by her table, clutching a heavy textbook on computational theory. She looked to be about 20, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and nervousness. "I am," Serafina replied, her voice flat, preparing for the inevitable question about the airline, the firing, the scandal. But the young woman didn't mention any of it. "I'm a junior at Reed College studying computer science," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. Wow. I wrote my senior high school thesis on your early neural network patents. Your 2018 paper on asynchronous neural mapping, the one you published in the Journal of Machine Intelligence, it completely changed how my professors teach synthetic data modeling. It's the reason I went into this field. Your work it's foundational." Serafina stared at her. The student wasn't seeing a disgraced CEO. She didn't see a meme or a villain or a cautionary tale. She saw a scientist. She saw the work, the pure, elegant, beautiful work that had been her life's first and truest passion. It was as if the young woman had reached through a year of noise and shame and touched the core of who she once was. A slow warmth spread through Serafina's chest, an unfamiliar feeling. It was not the thrill of power, but the simple, profound joy of being understood. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "That means more to me than you can possibly know." They talked for 20 minutes, not about stock prices or branding, but about recursive algorithms, the beauty of clean code, and the ethical tightrope of artificial intelligence. It was a conversation that reawakened a part of her she thought was dead. For the first time in a year, she felt like herself again. After the student left, floating on a cloud of inspiration, Serafina remained at the table. The interaction had been a defibrillator to her soul. She looked at her hands, the hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, and also typed the message that had ruined so many lives. What were they for now? She thought about the student's bright, eager face. She thought about her own journey, the scholarships, the late nights in the lab, the dismissive men in suits who underestimated her at every turn. Her rage, the rage that fueled the trans-American takeover, had come from a real place of hurt and struggle. She had just channeled it into a destructive firestorm. What if she could channel that energy, that experience, into something else? Not a bonfire, but a beacon. She picked up her tablet again, pushed the news article aside, and opened a blank document. Her fingers, which once moved with ruthless corporate efficiency, began to type with a new, deliberate purpose. She didn't write a business plan. She wrote a mission statement. The Monroe Foundation, to provide capital, mentorship, and foundational support for gifted young women and people of color in STEM. To ensure that the next generation of innovators is judged not by their appearance or background, but by the brilliance of their minds and the strength of their character. To build ladders, not walls. Her fall from the sky had been devastating, a public spectacle of hubris brought to ground. But here, on the solid earth, humbled and stripped of her hollow empire, Serafina Monroe finally understood. Power wasn't about buying airlines to punish disrespect. True power was about building a world where that kind of disrespect couldn't sideline the next brilliant mind waiting for her chance to fly. The price of her lesson had been a kingdom, but the wisdom she had purchased might just build a legacy. So where do we draw the line? Dr. Serafina Monroe's story is a tangled web of justice and revenge, of empowerment and ego. Was she a hero for taking an audacious stand against casual racism, using her immense power to enforce a standard of respect? Or was she a villain whose own hubris became her downfall, a cautionary tale about how the quest for vengeance can blind you to what truly matters? Her actions set off a chain reaction that cost people their careers, cost her an empire, and ultimately forced her to confront the person she had become. The karma that hit her was swift and severe, a perfect mirror of the power she herself had wielded. What do you think? Were Serafina's initial actions justified? Was the corporate karma she received a fitting end to her story? This isn't a simple case of right and wrong, and the most compelling stories never are. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your take on this incredible rise and fall. If you enjoy complex stories that make you think, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of power, ambition, and the hard lessons of life.